Thank you for coming. I'm Jennifer Homans, the founder and director of NYU's Center for Ballet and the Arts. I'm here to welcome you to tonight's program, Reimagining Preservation, Making Black Southern Stories Public Through Performance, with Aimee Meredith Cox, Imani Perry, and we have with us also the co-founders and directors of Wideman-Davis Dance here from South Carolina, Tanya Wideman-Davis and Thaddeus Davis. For those of you who don't know us, the center that is, you are now sitting in the studio of our space. Our offices are above you. We are an international research center for the performing arts focused on dance and its related arts and sciences. We have a fellowship program that brings together artists and scholars, the people who make the work and the people who study the work. And we also have public programs, many of which now draw from the work of our fellows and are curated by our fellows, like tonight's program. These programs are designed to expand the ways we think about the history, practice, and performance of dance in the 20th century. In the 21st century, here we are. This evening's program was curated by Aimee Meredith Cox, who's an Associate Professor of Anthropology at NYU, and has been a faculty fellow with us at CBA this year. We are immensely grateful to her for bringing together this wonderful group of people and this wonderful program. Aimee's bio is in your program, so I'm not going to go into too much detail now, but I did want to mention a couple of things. She's the acclaimed author of Shapeshifters, Black Girls, and the Choreography of Citizenship. She's also a dancer. And she has performed and toured internationally with Ailey 2 and with the Dance Theater of Harlem, and has choreographed performances as interventions in public and private spaces in Newark, Philadelphia, and Brooklyn. And as you'll see, that's part of our subject tonight. I'm going to let Aimee take over from here and introduce our other speakers. And I just want to welcome you and thank you all for being here. Aimee.
Hello. This feels like a dream. This has been like 9 months in the making, like logistically, but prior to that, like 5 decades in the making. And I'll explain why. But first, I want to thank Jennifer. Thank you so much, Kristen and Shui and Aimee, for all the work that you've done, not just for this event, but for the entire time that I've been a fellow here at the center. Thank you so much. So we are here. Right, we're physically here, but before I say anything else, I'd like us to really be here. Right, tonight we're going to be talking about what it means to be in community, what it means to really see people, what it means to think with your body. So we have to be here with our full selves. So I'm not going to do don't worry if you've been with me before, I'm not going to do an extended meditation, don't worry. I'm going to rein it in. We're just going to do a brief grounding so that we can be here. So if you can, feel your feet on the ground. So if your ankles are crossed, if you could just feel and you might even do this, like just feel that your feet are connecting to the earth, that you're here. And then feel all these contact points, right? Your feet on the ground, your butt in the seat, and then maybe the back of your chair supporting your spine, right? You're embodied, you are here. And then just wiggle your fingers around, just like circle your wrists, wiggle your fingers, and then let your hands land somewhere where you're really sensitive to touch. Right? Yeah, it might be on someone's shoulder, it might be on your thighs, but just feeling yourself here. And then take a deep, slow breath in through your nose. Really taking in air, which is life force, your breath, and let that fill you up. And take another sip of air, almost like you're a balloon about to burst. And then take another sip of air. How much can you hold? And then as slow as you can, let it go. Release. And as you release, feel yourself arriving here, present here. Yeah, and then if your eyes are closed, just open your eyes and just let's look around to see where we are. Like we run here from wherever we were and we just like sit down. Where are we? Look up, look around. What does this space look like? What does it feel like? Who's here? You might be seated next to someone you know, in which case say, hey, thank you for being here, friend. And if you don't know them, maybe you smile or you offer an exchange that lets you know that someone is here with you, other people are here with you. Yeah, so we're here together. So this is very much a conversation, and I just wanted to establish that this is not presentational as I stand in front of a music stand presenting. But anyway, prepared remarks. But it's not presentational. We're here very much in learning and in community and in exploration through conversation. So before I dive in, I'd like to offer the context from which tonight emerged, how we came to be here, Thaddeus, Tanya, Imani, all of you in this space. So I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio in the 80s and 90s. Yes, I'm going back that far because time and place matter in this conversation that we're having tonight. It was a peculiar cultural moment to be a Black girl in that part of the country along the Ohio River, socially and politically intersected by the Midwest, the East, Appalachia, and the South, as I watched and felt leadership nominally shift during the Reagan, Bush, Clinton era. My parents are educators and activists. I don't believe they worried so much about my immediate physical safety, but they were always concerned about the wellness of my psyche, and I felt that. So I was taught to prioritize words. Language is a form of protection. The thinking was if you were smart with your words, you could define yourself before someone else did. That even as a kid, one power you could try to yield was narrating yourself out of danger towards safety, and maybe even into a type of more self-defined existence. So as you might imagine, this didn't always work. My mouth got me more in trouble than anything else, but I developed a love for articulation. The stories my aunts, uncles, and grandparents told over and over again about that one time when they fill in the blank here with an example of everyday racialized violence thwarted by their wit, strength, or uncommon skill. I would write many of these stories down, and in this way, my adoration for the beauty of their spoken words translated into my love of writing. At the same time, I was always dancing, and eventually in a very serious way in what was called a pre-professional program every day after school, and I loved it. It was the only way I was able to feel that my body was mine. Writing and dancing were how I knew myself and understood the beauty of the Black Midwestern world that held me. They were less acts of singular mastery or achievement and more lessons in being with, practices that fed and sustained relationships. I believe so strongly in this trifecta of storytelling, embodied expression, and immersion in Black community that when I discovered anthropology in college, I immediately categorized ethnography as a Black cultural practice. Because I thought in its most idealized form, it was ultimately the practice of Black life. Learning from community, from a place of humility, and then co-creating meaning from that place. This is what Black feminist critical ethnographer Dee Soyini Madison calls body-to-body praxis. Although this idea was romance, it was not necessarily false. So the short version of the approaching end of this story is that various apparatuses of discipline and professionalization, graduate school, and the academy more generally, performing in the concert dance world, work to train me further and further away from the origin point, through which these creative world-making practices really only made sense to me. Our vibrant, contradictory, fleshy, lived, imagined, conjured, resuscitated, endlessly transformative Black lives. So meeting and being in conversation with Tanya and Thaddeus, co-directors of Wideman-Davis Dance over the past 10 months, has been a gift in this continuing saga of walking myself and my work back to that origin point and collaborating with others to do the same. So as you will see in a moment, Tanya and Thaddeus excavate the most generative and life-affirming aspects of ethnography, dance, choreography, and artistic practice, forging a renegotiation of how we assess the radical potential in these activities. Their work with artists and the communities they are a part of in the Black rural South could form the basis for a chapter in the National Book Award-winning South to America, A Journey Below the Mason-Dixon to Understand the Soul of a Nation. So I was thrilled when they named Imani Perry when asked if there was anyone in particular they would like to be in conversation with for this event. And I also, full transparency, said, aim lower. I don't know if we can get Imani. The budget will not allow. I don't know. I was like, anybody else? Anyway. Superstar. Imani Perry, who better to think with about the South beyond the manufactured boundaries of region for how it has defined this nation and every other part of it that has been made up and through its porous borders. Who better to dream with us about how we might understand preservation beyond material objects and markers in the built environment, but as enduring acts of being in and making relationships across geographies and generations? Who better to help us retrieve the intellectual brilliance and creative courage we first learned on the outside of the institutions that make their name, codifying and placing comparative value on what we have always known? Should I say that again? Right, codifying what we always knew in our guts, from our grandmothers, from our aunts, from ourselves. Who better to work with us to make the case for why, and specifically how, our bodies matter so much, not just in questions of Black cultural production, but in shaping the methods that might allow us to live differently, more connected to one another and the land, both sites we can't seem to stop betraying. So I want to share a little bit from Imani's South to America to kind of set the stage for part of what we're going to talk about today. And so this particular section, I don't have enough hands. Oh, hold on a second. So this particular section is from a trip that, as Imani is making her way across the country, she makes a stop in Boonesboro, Maryland, in order to visit the Crystal Grottos. They are what geologists refer to as inline sinkholes. So I just want to read you a little paragraph from this migration across the country. When I had asked about what the future of the Crystal Grottos would be after our tour ended, the guide looked circumspect. The owner was aging and managing the business was hard with a disability. She didn't know who was going to be equipped to take over. Maybe us, but I don't know. It would be easy to classify this as a problem of succession or business design. We could call it a lack of sophistication. But isn't this uncertainty universal? We choose daily to sustain or neglect some detail of our lives and experiences. In this period of history in which some people are clinging to the past and others are expunging it, perhaps we need to learn to acknowledge that most of us feel uncertain and even uneasy about what will sustain and what we will leave behind. I'm talking about places like caves and historic homes, but also practices like electoral processes, courts, and constitutional interpretations. I'm talking about heroes of history and our consensus narratives about how we declare ourselves as a nation. I'm talking about local cultures and collective values. What will we make of those things that we decide to keep intact? The moment we refuse the idols of history, we are faced with the question of whether we ignore that it ever was or turn to crafting a memory of it. I mean, I needed to caress the cool, dark dolomite in order to feel the cave. And if we aren't careful about what we are doing and where we are going, ecologically, politically, socially, we might find ourselves in a clearing that could be a trap without a lit way out. Thank you, Imani. And I'm not quite done. I just want to say, I'm almost done though. So just hang on one second. Let those words marinate. So you have everyone's bio in your program, so I won't recite what you have likely already read for yourselves in terms of everyone's multiple honors and the innovations they've made in their fields. So I would like to tell you some things you might not know. When I visited Tanya and Thaddeus in Alabama in February of this year, I watched a rehearsal in Montgomery where it was difficult to tell who was in charge. But it was clear how much care and skill went into establishing an environment where refining the creative process was a responsibility everyone shared. And at the end of this, do you all remember, at the end of rehearsal, there was a moment where there was a viral moment where Beyonce's Texas Hold'em, people are making these dances. So all of the dancers, we were all like trying to do a viral TikTok. And then it shifted into like church dance, church praise dance. And it went on for like what, like maybe an hour? It was almost as long as the rehearsal. It was like spontaneous. And then Tanya said, yeah, this is really how we make dance. Right, in that moment, like in community with laughter, after the thing that we call the official rehearsal, that's where the real process happens. The next day in rural Harpersville, I watched Tanya handle the unpredictability of a meeting with local artists with humor and agility that made the meeting a lesson in grace. I saw Thaddeus gently lead his dancers in the art of being in community, more by what he didn't say than what he did. They both offered reminders that good work only happens when you can slow down long enough to be present. Thank you for that. Imani Perry, you I'm sure know her by any number of things she's written that upend our lazy habits of knowing. Or you might have heard her speak and marveled at how gentleness and ease can have such space-commanding power. But what you might not know, especially if you are not in the academy, is that Imani's generous mentorship and support across cohorts of scholars is unmatched in this world that feeds on ranking, distinction, and comparison. In casual, everyday, and also through official capacities, she moves through these academic streets with a grounded brilliance that exceeds the limits of institutional narcissism and myopia. She moves through these streets like what matters most has no currency here, and therefore perhaps can never really be diminished or elevated by the fickleness of scholarly trends. I offer these bios instead of what you have in your program because they speak to the ways of being and being with that are at the heart of the methodologies we'll talk about tonight. These are the bios you can only know if you spend some time. Thank you for spending time with us tonight. I offer these bios because just as there are many scholars, artists, politicians who talk with vigor about Black bodies, Black life, Black afterlives, there are far, far, far fewer who actually are in community with and love Black people. Those folks are here tonight. So thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Thaddeus. Thank you, Imani. Thank you for being here. Thank you for loving us so well. And now I'm going to ask Thaddeus and Tanya to come up to introduce the film that we'll watch. Thank you so much.
Wow, Aimee, thanks. How do we follow that?
Exactly. So I'm Thaddeus Davis, co-director of Wideman-Davis Dance.
I'm Tanya Wideman-Davis, co-director of Wideman-Davis Dance.
It's wonderful to be here. Thank you, Jennifer, and the Ballet Center, the staff, Imani, Aimee. And we're just excited to be here. So many faces that we know, that we're really intimate with, and then the faces that we don't know. We're happy to be able to bring our film here and to share this 1 year, first year of a 3-year project, the Monuments Project, that we're in, just completed our 2nd year. But we're gonna share this evening the first film of 3 films to come. There's one the first year, then the 2nd year, and 3rd year.
Yes, and so this is a 3-year project that we are working on. The first year we worked in Montgomery, Alabama. 2nd year, which we've just finished, is Harpersville, Alabama. May 31st, we go to Columbia, South Carolina and do the 3rd year of the project. So we should just show the film.
Yes.
And not give too much information.
Yes. We've been in Montgomery for a year.
The year was spent in 3 phases, inhabiting 3 spaces. September 2022.
Phase 1 is the performance of our show, Migratus Ataraxia. Migratus Ataraxia is thinking about the humanity of enslaved Africans, the life that they lived despite bondage, that they were human, and that they went to bed as enslaved people, were reminded that they were enslaved by the enslaver. But as they slept at night, as they had their own privacy inside of their enslaved dwellings, they were free people in their minds, though bondage was reminded to them. So it was important in that production to think about Black life as worthy of being memorialized, worthy of being remembered. There was humanity, even though it wasn't acknowledged by the enslaver.
Migratus is a word that we made up, and it's migration and habitus, so 2 words that we put together to make migratus. And it's the habitual patterns of migrating, why we migrate. Ataraxia is actually a Greek term, and it means peace of mind. So when you put those 2 words together, we're thinking about migrating for a peace of mind, which is what Black folks have always done. We were really interested in the audience immersing themselves in the experience. It starts outside, and you navigate and migrate through the house. The audience does, and the performers do. So the performers, in essence, lead you to different rooms in the house through the trajectory of the performance.
Picking cotton in Georgia, where my family's from, and sitting in a home that was a, what do you call it, a 1-door, 1-shot house, shotgun home. That was her home. We sat down. Guess what? No air conditioning. When I walked into this home, I felt that. The mosquitoes. I felt that. Your performances were more intensified because of that lack of air conditioning. So I think it was a blessing for me anyway, to feel you all perform with the sweat and the glistening. You know, it was more intense for me to see you. You looked at me, I almost fainted. Because you read not what was going on inside of my heart. So thank you for a beautiful, intense performance. And no air conditioning that made me feel like I was in that shotgun home with my mother-in-law who experienced these things firsthand.
And so this concept of migrating from place to place, from room to room, making connections with strangers that you've just met or you don't even really know, making eye contact, going from the past to the future and back again to the past, I think these are all reflective of the deeper African diasporic experience. So bravo.
Through all the trauma that Black folks have gone through all the trauma that enslaved folks have gone through, we negate the fact that there is love and that love can happen inside of trauma. And so at the end of Migratus Ataraxia, we have a duet with Thaddeus and myself that centers love and it centers care. And that's what closes out the whole experience of that performance. We felt like it made sense to just end with that and then filter out of the room and have you all join us in that love. You're welcome.
December 2022. The library space was an opportunity for us to think about literacy and the importance of education and literacy and the architectural space that that library holds. The idea of the performance is for people to come into the library and move through the library and see the books, but also see Black life moving, to see movement, to see dance, to see performance inside of the space.
A large part of this grant, when we were conceiving of it, was going into a community, not doing what traditional dance companies do, which is come in and perform a couple performances. They're there for a week. They may do some lecture demonstrations and some talks and then leave. We were a part of companies that did that, and we did not want to do that with our own organization. And so with this grant, we developed this idea to come into community, not parachuting in, but like live in the community for a year and actually commune with the people that are here. And so a part of that was thinking about what artists need post-COVID, which is funding. So in Montgomery, we gave 9 $5,000 fellowship to interdisciplinary artists who live in Montgomery. And that was a process where we got to know different artists in the community. We saw their work. We had them submit applications, and we picked from those applicants.
My name is Michaela McKee-McKenzie. I am a 20-year-old dance student from Alabama State University. For my fellowship work, I'm planning to direct a play called Bonnie and Paul. It's a Black love story set in 1955, right before the arrest of Rosa Parks. The theme of the play is to show that love and happiness can still be a monument in times of turmoil.
Hey y'all, I'm Kenyatta Blocker, but y'all can just call me K Blocks. Anytime I get to do art, I just get excited in that sense. But I feel like this is a project that, I don't know, I just have free reign over.
What's up y'all, this is T1 and this is my dojo. This project is really going to be an ode and monument of my girlhood. Just celebrating all the things that I really enjoyed and celebrating my inner child. She lives through me every day through jewelry, fashion, the colors I wear, the makeup I do. I just want it to be a really big celebration because I've never had the opportunity to really share my art like this.
My name is Winfred Hawkins, and this is my studio. This is where I work. Right now it's just me messing around with color. This is also a little animation I made using like sketches and playing with the color components. They bleed in and out and the colors shift and change, and it's like 4 images so far. I was gonna do a little bit more.
You know, coming in as a new artist and jumping out on the art scene, realizing injustices that had been taking place, and I quickly went into activism mode to try to find a solution to it. But in the midst of it, me as an artist was neglected. I haven't had a chance to create a series. I haven't had a chance to create a body of work that I can show. And so being a part of this fellowship for me is some built-in accountability, so I can say, hey, I want to do a series and I'm going to complete that series and utilize this fellowship to do it.
The project that I'm currently working on is titled The Butterfly's Gospel. This is a collection of poetry that I have been working on for the last 4 years. It started off just as journals about my life experience and turned into short stories, and eventually I just took a lot of interest in the poetic form.
I just started kind of imagining what the possibilities of some of these descendants could be. My mind started going in another direction because I'm a comic book kid. What if there was an alternate dimension or an alternate universe? And what if in the middle passage, some of these people that experience these things change the story?
Well, I created a monument Montgomery about all the monuments that we have here. It was basically to see or to ask the question, how do we see them?
My name is Tori Nicole Jackson Edwards, and this is my little art studio. Anytime they're allowing people to do murals, almost anytime, there's an agenda behind it. And I'm so worn, and it's not that the civil rights wasn't important. It is important, but there's also like brown people have done so many more things, and it's like, let us do some other stuff too. There's so much more to communicate.
March 2023.
in a city like Montgomery that's filled with history, but the history is built with civil rights and lynching. But what else was there besides that? What else could we celebrate in a city like Montgomery? The Elks Lodge was a sort of hub or a social spot. It is a building that still functions. As we think about Black life, we want to think about, well, where did Black people go safely to socialize? A monument means that someone has a certain amount of money and a certain amount of political capital to be able to pull that off. And in Black community, I'm originally from Montgomery, the Black community that I grew up in, gestures, churches, people, they were monuments. And so monuments look different in Black community. So we're exploring the ideas of monuments. And so the people that you saw in the videos are the community members that we interviewed and got the different stories of people who just lived here in Montgomery.
There was a photographer that was working here in Montgomery from 1965 to 1968, and his name was Jim Pepler. And he took images of people just out in community, in neighborhoods, Black neighborhoods, but also in Seminole clubs. And so we took those archival images. There were these shapes that people made, and we took those shapes and then created our own phrases off of the 10 images that we had. That was the root and the base context for all this movement that you saw.
We're trying to really embody the idea of a monument, that the images are a monument. What happened before the snapshot? What happens after the snapshot? That's where our creativity comes into play, how to link all those different snapshots together to make them move. It's about building an art community across the South. And we're not the first people to do that or the first people to have that idea, but it is our first time thinking about, we can't selfishly think of making art. We want to make art that's changing community, make art that's supporting community, and make art that is central to community. And so as we do that, we have to have partners and people that are interested in that same idea.
One thing that I really do appreciate is Wideman-Davis using the Mellon Foundation to bring some sense of stability to artists here in this city. One of the struggles is always, how do you support yourself while trying to do the thing that you want to do? But like some of the funds that were gifted to each of the artists has really helped move my practice along, as far as even just marrying sound with the visual. Just those opportunities, grant funds, and having that freedom to do that and not have to worry about where it's coming from is a huge relief. It gives you that freedom just to play and figure out what happens.
I went to y'all last performance, and yes, there is a great difference in the feel of the emotions of the performance from last performance to this performance. And this performance, like they said, is joyful.
One of the most amazing images in the Jim Pepler collection was a drag show that happened in this club in the 60s. A drag show, images of a drag show happening in this club.
Our Black life is not just the trauma. Our Black life is the love, it's the perseverance, it's the tenacity. It's also the innovation that we have come into just simply because of our existence here. And oftentimes that's not necessarily the predominant narrative that gets exposed about Black life, that it's not a monolith, that we have so many different components of our life, and that there's an interiority of the quiet.
And those people sort of blend into everyday existence. We know them, but they're just our parents, our aunts, our uncles, our mothers, our fathers. And they walk these streets of Montgomery as regular citizens. They didn't get an award, they didn't win a Peace Prize, they didn't do that. But that generation that kind of went to college in the mid to late 60s, those are the people who are citizens that are leading the city now.
Who are these people? What have they done? How have they crossed the line? How have they progressed Montgomery? How have they just utilized their voice and their acts of service to bring about change that affect the daily lives of people who need it?
My thing is never forget. And what you've done, and I'm just so grateful that I was a small part of it, you know, because it was like reminding me of my responsibility, not only to my people, but to me. Because I live here because it feeds me. It feeds me. And I think it feeds all of us. And I think we need to acknowledge it. Yes. To each other and to the world. Then it will be a better place.
Whoa. I'm dispensing with my prepared questions because what I want to do is speak from a really embodied place and a really honest place. Not that these questions aren't honest, but we just spent some time. We spent time together, right? And we're already in conversation. I want to continue that conversation and have you all be a part of that. Every time that I see that film, the visceral response, the emotional response is so overwhelming. It's like a wellspring. I can't even explain when it happens in the film or what the catalyst is, but it is so powerful. And when I watched it last night, Thaddeus sent me the video on my phone, and I watched it twice, and it just, each time, it was like there was no dulling of that response. And so my question to myself was, what is it about what I'm witnessing that strikes a chord and feels like it is touching on such a deep void in my own practice and in my own experience? And there's something about seeing the beauty of Black people on screen like that that is, you know, it feels absurd to say that in 2024, but it's just so moving to me. But it also makes me think about the work that I want to continue to make. And so I guess the question that I have for y'all, you know, of course you're in it, you know it like the back of your hand, but what it feels like for you to be in witness of your own work in these different audiences, and what you now, as you move on to moving to a new phase of your project, when you watch that again, what strikes you as the most, resonant part of that, not the work or the viewing of the work that you want to carry forward?
I'm always stunned that people have such a visceral reaction to that film, because I feel like we do the work and we're so ensconced in it that that film does not give you the live experience. The live experience is so much more heightened than that film is. And we just make, like we were just saying a couple days ago, like we made that film, we kind of put it on the shelf and moved on to the next part of the project because we're so in tune to just doing that it doesn't really, we don't really understand the magnitude of it until people see it, and then they give us their reaction.
Yeah, I think I'm usually emotional 2 years later after a project is completed. And I get a chance to go back and have my non-emotional experience, disassociation, detachment from it, and I go back and look at it and I go, oh my God, it's exactly what I thought it could be. Right? But it's too close. And so even we still have an entire year to transition to Columbia, South Carolina after 2 years in Alabama in 2 different locations. But I will say this, I'm extremely proud to be from Alabama originally and to have come to New York at a certain point of my life and say, that place is in my rearview mirror. Notice how I said mirror. I didn't say mirror.
Where you're from, Thaddeus.
So I just want to make sure I get my, and so to come to New York and to work in New York and to be here and to come back later and to bring something that's Alabama to New York, as opposed to bringing just myself.
Yeah, yes.
I'm extremely proud of it.
Yeah. Imani, I'll ask a long question. I'll give you, but in your book, do I have your book right here? In the first pages of your book, there's a quote from Alvin Ailey. And so one of the obvious things that I think about with Tanya and Thaddeus' work is the Alvin Ailey quote, dance came from the people, we give it back to the people. And I'm wondering, first of all, you start your book talking about dance. Yeah. You offer that quote. And what is it about, we can talk about Black cultural productions and practices in a myriad of ways. What is it in your mind specifically about dance? What does dance do in your work? What is the possibility in dance?
Yeah. So first of all, thank y'all so much. I mean, it's so beautiful and true, and that's part of what I think I can answer the question in that way. So the book starts with talking about the French quadrille and then moves to the Kalenda and Congo Square, but it also starts with a quote from Alvin Ailey. There's something in dance that does two things that are, for me, a way of telling the truth that doesn't get told often about Black life. One is that the very thing, right, so Black folks dance, right, we dance, and the very thing that now the world is catching up in terms of realizing what's important about being a human, that is to be in relation to each other, to be embodied, to experience joy and intimacy, those things that we do, right, that were described as as frivolous. But actually now we understand the essence of what it means to be human, right? Now the scientists are catching up with things that we did, right, and knew. That's actually exactly, what you all articulate so beautifully is actually what it meant to sustain life under conditions of complete degradation and captivity, right? But also, so that's one piece, right? That this is this fundamental sort of thing about living and beauty and love that gets sustained. But the other thing is that about Black life is that we believe in virtuosity.
Yes.
Right? We like things to be done well. Right? Beautifully, elegantly, right? And dance is one of the dance and music, and for me, and especially as I'm writing now, I'm rejecting the distinction. They're the same thing, right? And I'm also extremely proud to be from Alabama, right? And that people call me an Alabama booster, and I accept that. But because there's also the visual art tradition there that is so robust, but that is in some ways the sort of the sound and movement is at the core of our expression of virtuosity and language too, which is part of why, for us as writers, right? So that's why it had to start there, right? It had to start there.
Thank you for that. I'm thinking about the word virtuosity. And I love when this happens. I'm not even looking at my questions because I love when that happens. Anyway, and wondering, this is a conversation that we've started upstairs and we've been talking about for a while, but in thinking about Black artistic practices. So I have a friend who's a curator, and she is both hugely excited about what she sees as an intensification of Black studies relationship with the art world, but at the same time troubled by the fact that with this conversation that's happening, with the work that's happening, that there is an entrenchment in these delineations of distinction between a practitioner and an artist, a craftsperson, a craft and artistry, a critic, and pick another word, but that what has in fact in her mind happened through this conversation is not a renegotiation of what it means to be an artist, but a holding fast to these distinctions that really are not the way that we think about artistic and creative practices in Black communities, particularly in the Black rural South. Yes. So I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you saw that play out, the way Thaddeus, like the I'm a dancer conversation. Me too, and right, like so this idea of how we define something as masterful, and even in that conversation, maybe thinking what training means or doesn't mean, or how we can think differently about training in the context of Black communities.
So it's the idea which I was sharing with Aimee upstairs is that you're from dancing people. So you go back and you say, I'm a dancer. They say, okay, good. Show me something. Something. Show me something. Because I can dance too. That's the point. I dance too. So what's so special about your dance that I need to stop and watch you do it? Because you may need to watch me and learn from me. Yes. So all of that studio stuff that you call yourself, the study of dance is not dancing. That's the study of it. So we're proud of you, and it goes back to that virtuosity thing. Like, be virtuosic, but don't get too big. Right. Don't start smelling. Right.
Don't start smelling yourself.
Right. Don't start smelling yourself, because then we're going to take you down a notch. And I'm going to have to get up and show you something. So there is that thing of virtuosity, but then this idea of like not segregating and saying that just because I dance, I'm anointed and I'm special beyond the rest of you. That you do that, I do this, but I actually do a little bit of all of this because it's required.
Yeah, we were just talking about upstairs how last week we went to a casino that had a blues club in the casino. And so there was a blues singer in a band, and there was this man who was there who was dancing on the dance floor. He was probably in his 60s, a mask with, yes. So he like ate up the floor. He decided that he was going to get down on the floor and like do this phrase on the floor. A floor phrase.
Floor work.
Yes, floor work. Yes. So then the singer who was in the band got down on the floor too, and they both were on the floor doing this dance. So it was like this like virtuosic performative experience that was just happening in this impromptu space that was very similar to what happens in the church when people get happy. So there's the blues club and there's the church, and these performative spaces are very similar to each other. It's just they happen on a different day. But that, like, it was also welcoming, because at a certain point, they started playing music. People started doing line dances. We went downstairs to do the line dance with the people. This line dance was so complicated, it took us probably about 10 minutes to actually figure it out. And then once we figured it out, the song was over and people left us on the dance floor. So it's these spaces of virtuosity that happen in rural spaces. It happens in Montgomery, the urban southern spaces. They're all over the South, but for some reason, the North thinks that they are the only people that are doing virtuosic creative experiences.
Come on now. And so then how does that translate to your dancers who are coming from these Northern traditions, right? Concert dance world. How do you bring them into this process? How do you recruit dancers? What does that look like, that mentorship in this new way of thinking about, or to them, a new way of thinking about what it means to be an artist or be an artistic practice?
So I think that what in this project or in this process, because it's about the South and it's about talking and working in community and working with people and listening to their stories and listening intentionally to kind of gain information that maybe is said and then what is hinted at. They're all walking away from those conversations going, my aunt said something about that. So regardless of where they're from, we have a dancer that was from New York, from Washington, D.C., we had a dancer from Philadelphia, and a dancer from New York. Everyone comes south, and in reality, we're all from the South. Yeah. We have the Great Migration that we talk so much about, that slung people all across the country. So as we're working in this process, everyone is rekindling their relationship with the South. And so the beginnings and the ends of whose story we're telling, it's indecipherable. We can't determine, well, what about that? Because we don't want to be making it only using the local narrative. We want everyone is bringing their narrative in to merge it with, because we're living there with the community to try to be a part of the community.
I was going to just ask how Imani's work was central for that process, or how you were thinking with Imani's work during that process. But I didn't want to cut you off, Tanya, if you wanted to.
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
So I read your book last summer, and I'll let Thaddeus tell you his story with the book. But I read that book and I said, oh my gosh, this is what we're doing in this project. Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
And so it was like, at some point I have to meet this woman because we're doing the same work. We're doing it in an embodied way. You're doing it in an embodied, putting your body in the work to actually get the content for the book. But that you also have an appreciation for dance. And I felt like reading the book, it was a dance. It was an embodied practice of me putting myself in this book to read it, but also the moves and the curves and the way you move through the South is very prevalent in that book. Like it literally like was a slide, how you slid
in and out. Yeah.
Slid in and out of these spaces and like wrote about it in these chapters. So I mean, I felt very close to the book. I like take it everywhere I go with me now because there's so much information in it. And I always, like during this project, I go back to the book and I read little snippets of it and I bring it to my class that I'm teaching. Or I might bring something into rehearsal for us to talk about before we start our warm-up class for the day. We spend a half hour talking about that before we even start our dance class. So that book was really pivotal, I feel, to me.
Yeah, there's a kind of connection to be able to read something and say, I don't know exactly what it is in Savannah, but there are triggers that I'm having as I'm reading this content. And these triggers are familiar to me from living in Alabama. Mm-hmm. And so as these triggers happening, it also says to me that, we oftentimes say that Black people or Black life is not a monolith. It's not. But there are triggers that we all can reference to go, I'm from the Pentecostal, I'm from the Baptist, but we have a certain connection in how we practice these religious experiences. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first, I'm coming to South Carolina. I'm going to visit y'all. But I think, it's thank you so much for bringing the book into your work, because there is the dynamic relationship that you describe, right? So it's not that you are, that your work, you're not going and sort of collecting, right? If there's a dynamic relationship, you're present. For me, it also speaks to part of what is so important, because there's a way in which the South, in particular Montgomery, gets described as stuck in 1965.
Yes.
Forever, right?
Yep.
And so and it's not living. And part of the way that you keep it alive is actually understanding there are these active relationships that are constantly being produced, people leaving and coming, and also that it's not, even to understand the significance of the civil rights movement, if you actually understand the significance, you have to acknowledge the life beyond the movement.
Yes.
Right? I mean, even that, right? And so I'm stuttering because I'm so deeply moved by the work that y'all are doing, right, and have done, because it is about I think that for me the work was a great deal about understanding the vitality, the aliveness of the region, and how it still was moving the country about, even though we freeze it in the past. Yeah. It's still the core of this nation, whether or not people want to acknowledge it.
Aimee, can I?
Let's go.
So I had this thought when I was reading the book. Were you traveling in these places mostly alone? Yeah. Okay, so what was that like, traveling alone as a Black woman, doing this research and asking those really hard questions and putting your body in these spaces alone?
Foolish at certain points. I mean, I was trying to be like Zora, right? Yeah. Or like Catherine Dunham. I mean, which is, speaks to what, which goes back to what you were saying at the beginning, Aimee, about sort of trying to disrupt the silos of scholarship and practice and art, right? Which is what I think they were trying to do almost 100 years ago, that we're still trying to figure out how to do. And there are moments that I, eased my way out of places, right? But I thought it was important, because that was like, so part of this, for me, this center, I would kept trying to think, okay, so I have this ancestor who it looks like was born in 1769 in Maryland. She winds up in Alabama in the late 19th century. She lives very long time, and her parents are born in Maryland. So she is likely was enslaved in tobacco and worked in tobacco fields. And I wanted to, so I put her at the center and say, well, what does it mean to tell a history of the country, to tell a story of the country that puts the life of people who are essential to its economic foundation but disregarded in its constitution of its subjects at the center. And to do that, I think to testify to that also required being honest about my own embodiment as a person, even though I'm a citizen, but so often in a kind of embodiment that is disregarded and vulnerable. I felt like I had to do that in order to actually tell the story. There are the moments of fear in the book that were really important for me to capture and to do, and they were physical, right? And even that section, I was thinking about we're in these crystal in these caves, and there's the guide turns off the light at a certain point, and it's pitch black, and she's like, if you stay down here long enough, you'll go blind. And we're all, and you can, and everybody's like, right? And I'm thinking, I don't remember how we got, if I have to crawl on my hands and knees, can I get my way out? Right? And that's some kind, that's a kind of, I don't know, epigenetic kind of memory of something, right?
Yeah.
But that, so I had this sort of visceral response, but I felt like that had to be part of the telling.
But I think about like in across the work, right? Whether we're talking about ethnography or choreography or being immersed in community. And I go back to my own graduate school experience, and I was not trained in methods. It was just to sort of assume that, go off into the field, right? Like we had our social theory courses, but the methods course was how to write grants. There was not like a methods course. And this is true for a lot of my contemporaries, that there was not a methods course. And I think there is a certain part of that is a holdover of the arrogance of the discipline, like, more than them just going there, whatever you find is gonna be, sort of authoritative knowledge. But it also strikes me as I think about Black study in the sense of the way that Fred Moten talks about Black study, is that ethnography wasn't something that was necessarily scary to me, because it was the way that I understood it was as a Black feminist practice. If you do it the right way, if you do it the way that you're supposed to do it, right? You go into community with a sense of humility. You go there to learn. You go there to sort of figure out what is happening in that space. And I was like, that's how I grew up. That's how I learned to be in Black community. And so there's this way in which, through training and through the institutions that we make our through and where we get paid and are able to do the work, that we're almost being retrained in what we already knew, but in a way that strips away that deeper knowing, that we don't even trust that we know it. I don't know, and I don't wonder if because I think about your experience as dancers in Dance Theater of Harlem, your experience in the not just concert dance world, but very specific experience, Black ballet, concert dance, and how you made that shift, that very particular type of training, back to this, which I would call like home training. I'm trying to think of a word, but like, or I don't know, embodied training. How you made your way, or what yearning brought you out of that into the work that you're doing now.
Go ahead, Thaddeus.
Yeah, as you were starting to deconstruct this sort of academic language, I can remember one of our mentors and really, really close friend who's here, Myron Beasley, started to help us understand the things that we were doing and how they showed up in the academy. And helping us get a sense of value, particularly me, I won't speak for Tanya, but me, value around these things of, I ain't scared of black folks.
Yeah.
Now, I also had to learn in Chicago, you can't get off at every gas station just because it's a gas station. I had to learn that. Because I grew up, if I see black folks at the gas station, I stop at that gas station. I feel comfortable. But that doesn't mean the same thing in Chicago. So I had to learn that too. But my point being is that I'm not a big question asker, because a child stays in a child's place, and when you're around grown folks, you listen and don't talk. That's Southern training. So as I'm around elders, I'm not a big question asker, but I was with someone always who was willing to ask the question, and I love to hear the answers. So when Myron helped me to start to go, oh, this is how we language this in the academy, it became to my advantage to understand both sides of the track. So the transition to going from ballet, going into the community, again, they already dance, so rhythm ain't a problem. Movement, quality, and flow, and that's all ballet is to me, energy and how you move energy through the body. You choose to start vertical as opposed to starting, so there's no difference in my approach and my perspective. We're not taking ballet into the community. We're taking dance and movement. So we break that thing up that way as well.
But all of those forms are mapped on our body, and in that mapping, we can take it and deconstruct it and flip it and throw it away and then bring it back and make something new. And so also going into these communities and realizing that there is a lot of codifying of dance that happens through these line dances. We went out skating one night in Montgomery, and after the roller skating was done, then they had line dancing that happened after the skating. And so the community that was at the roller skating event, which was just an evening event, they circled around us and brought us into their process of teaching us these line dances that they had. And it was so like, it wasn't like, I'm gonna teach you. It was like, okay, come on. Now we go to the right, it's the left leg. Like, you get in where you fit in, you learn it, and that's like the grace that the community gives you to transfer these dance forms that don't stay like this, because then somebody else takes it and they morph it again. So there's these many iterations of dance that lives in these communities, and every community has their version of what the Tamiya dance is at this particular time or whatever.
When you said, I was just taking me back to when I was in Harpersville. So I was in Harpersville visiting Tanya and Thaddeus for just like 2 days. It was short in February, but the richness of that experience, and I don't know that that film almost did it, almost brought me to like what I felt in Harpersville. But what struck me, so many things struck me, but going to that church, Mount Olive Church, and just the ease of being, and the way that you both were like, it reminded me of field work, right? It's just like, who knows what's gonna happen? Someone might be there, someone might not be there. We'll see what happens. We're just flowing in community. And how you had to both build trust around the question of your presence there, like, why are you here and why are you giving me money? And then how you built those relationships. I just would love to hear you talk a little bit more about that process. What does it really mean to come into community? Because we use those words a lot, collaborative work or community-based, but that's not what you were doing. It wasn't that. It was a different way of being in connection that exceeded that in my mind.
So I'm gonna kind of go back to something you said that relates to this. So when we were dancing with Dance Theater of Harlem, we had to do community engagement work. That was just a part of that era. And it was kind of the beginning of that era. And so we would go into community and we would do these lecture demonstrations. We would go and we would teach, classes or a host of different things. But that information was so pivotal for us because it developed for us a way of thinking about how we would be interested ourselves in being in community with people. And being in community with people different than that model, because we wanted a more intimate relationship. Or not that like I'm coming and giving you something. There's a whole lot that's already here. Can you come and teach us as we are maybe sharing with you something? And so there's this transference of sharing that happens that I think helped build trust with the community. But also that, we performed this first piece that is in a plantation home. That's our entry point into these communities. We're like, okay, we're here, and we're going into a space that is a space that has a lot of context around it, and we're putting our art form in this really contentious space. And so it's almost like we're coming in, this is what we do. We're here, we're working in digital media, we're working in performance, we're working in all of the capacities of interdisciplinary arts that we're working in at that moment. So you can see that we do this and that we're really committed to it. Now, please embrace us so that we can be in community with you, and maybe you can create too.
Does that open up trust? I mean, if you see it starts it, okay.
It starts it.
Or disarms, or
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that what was important, so we didn't start actually rehearsing the first year until late July. But Tanya and I moved there June 1st. So it was important for us to visit and see other people's work and see what they were doing and be at different events and be seen first. Even introduced, but be seen by people so that they could get used to seeing us. And in Harpersville in year 2, one of the fellowship artists, we gave him the check at the first convening. The second meeting, he showed up and said, I ain't cashed that check. I don't know if you're gonna want that money back or not. Because there's not this sense of why do you show up in my community and just give me some money? I don't know what the strings are.
Who does that?
Who does that? What's up with $5,000 just so I can make something? I don't know about that. I'm gonna go to the second meeting and see what they say then, because they might ask for it back. and
then who does that to black folks?
Right.
Who that have been extracted from?
Sounds like subprime lending to me, but So it was really about having to be there and be seen just in casual settings, and then, we're doing a performance. I heard about your performance. And just reiterating that over and over for 3, 6, 5 weeks, and then them coming, oh wow, this is what you meant. I was wondering how you're gonna do a performance in a plantation house. Why would black folks want to go to a plantation? Right. There's also that narrative, so all of that built trust.
And so we have our researcher here, our research developer here as well, and we talk a lot about having to build trust in these communities before we bring the white folks in. That is real. Absolutely. Because then they're like, okay, well, we trust them. If you vetted them, then we trust these white people.
Because that's another very real thing about being in the South. There's still distrust amongst black and white people. No matter how we want to get around it, that's real. And I haven't been there for 30 plus years, but to be back and to get back in the community and still see this is not, and there's a way of being, there's a kind of socializing and behavior and discomfort, but yet I know how to be in the space, but I'm uncomfortable. And so that's a real thing. And there is still a black side of town and there's a white side of town. Even though Montgomery is 65% black, there's still a black side, and there's very few white people in Montgomery now, but it's still black and white.
But I mean, I'm sure you can attest to this, that the older generation will say to us, well, we'll be with each other out in space, but we're not going to be going to each other's homes.
No, not in the house, no.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's an earned distrust, right? And it's a self-preservation. It's a disposition that is self-preserving.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that's the other question is how that it poses And I mean, I think it's interesting, right? Because I also think in lots of northern cities, or certainly in Midwestern cities, there's a lot of segregation.
Oh, yes.
But it's not
Cincinnati, Ohio.
articulated and also not necessarily adopted by Black folks
It's
as a
felt,
self-preservation, right?
Yeah, I mean, and just you started to talk about it, but I want to hear more about intergenerational learning and being in community in that way, and how that, to me, it felt like it wasn't even a strategy, it was a necessity. It was just how it was, like the way that you work together, the way art is created in Harpersville in particular, and how you maybe thought about that prior to, or it just emerged as part of your immersion in that community.
We've been thinking about working intergenerationally for a while now. I really love the conversations that happen from the elders with young folks. I just feel like it's so rich. We actually, during a Q&A once after a performance, there was a heated discussion with one of our dancers who's was 26, I think, at the time, and one of the elders in the Montgomery community. And the elder was saying that, desegregation happened and it might not have been the best thing for us. And we were good. Like, we had these flourishing neighborhoods. We were, being with each other and educating each other. And we had this mode of being that was generative, and it was, I can't think of another word for it, but Michael couldn't understand that. He was like, you didn't know that you didn't have access to resources, and like white folks had all this, and there was this disconnect of thinking about desegregation that was there, that was real.
Oh, I mean, I can't identify hardly a single elder who doesn't have a sense of loss that can't associated with desegregation.
Yeah.
Because segregation persisted, but it was really loss of Black institutions was so much of what it did, right? That was the cost.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I love that you facilitated that conversation, because I think that's one, and I think that's part of all how you describe the work that you're doing is a recovery of a truth about Black people past and present that is actually so. It's not just muted, but it's often denied, right? That there was a there, there's a there, right? That I think actually has to be transmitted to young folks.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was always multiple generations in one house.
Right.
So there was always intergenerational conversations. If it was nothing more than being told what to do by not just your mother and father, but there was always a grand somebody in your house. And so when we're talking even with Michael, having that sort of pushback against her, it was very respectful.
Yes.
Right.
It was done in a way that he made sure that he didn't cross the line to be disrespectful or tell her how she should be thinking. It was more posed as a question. Don't you think? Wouldn't you want? As opposed to, no, you're just wrong. Yeah. And so there's always that level of respect. And so as we're thinking about interviewing people and working in the community, it's like collecting that information to say, these are the things that we saw, and this is the performance that you help us create. Right. And that's what this intergenerational conversation helps us tease out.
And even in that conversation, what I'm thinking about is like the value, different value that's placed on what's considered a resource. So Michael's like, you didn't have all of this, but we had all of this. This is the resource that we value.
Yes.
So I'm wondering how that shows up in the way that you think about preservation. What is it that we're preserving? What does that mean in the context of the way that you talk about it? Our monuments are the dynamism of Black life in motion and action, ever evolving.
Yeah.
And so what does preservation mean in that context?
I think through these stories that we have gotten from these people in these communities, so from Montgomery to Harpersville, the preservation is about telling those stories, but also telling those stories and having them almost like reanimated into the performances that we do. Because we have talked about several times that the work looks so different that we have done in these last 2 years, the physical work, because we're having conversations with the people, because we're living with the people, because we are just like rubbing next to them, like because we're in proximity of them, our dance movement completely shifted. So we talk about, it's more grounded. It's like everything for the most part is like on the ground. Like there's some leg stuff that happens, but it's like not even priority. Like if the leg goes up, it's coming back down to do something else in the body. Like it's just so visceral and so connected to the environment that we're in that this work couldn't be made in New York. It couldn't be made in Chicago because we don't have those stories from the people.
And it's what we've started labeling it 2 feet on the ground dancing.
Yeah.
Like that kind of, which I didn't understand how something being in one location allowed for the location to have an effect on me, as opposed to I come in and say, this is what I do. I'm here and I'm watching people move around and looking at how people are walking down the street and how they're trying to park as close as they can to the building so they can do less walking.
Yes.
But that's just because of the heat and how all of these things begin to affect you beyond a step in a studio.
Yeah.
That you're actually taking information in daily all the time. And so that extended time of 12 months as opposed to 2 or 3 weeks or dropping in and dropping out changes how you think about stuff. You realize that you want to communicate back to people in a way that they see themselves. So yes, as Tanya said, the legs and all that technical stuff happens, but it ain't important. Because making sure that their stories are animated is what is priority.
It feels like the ancestors were telling us how to make the movement.
Yeah, it felt like that when I watched it. When I was in rehearsal, I was like, I feel like I could do this.
Yeah.
And I don't often feel that. But not even about do it well, but do it because I was moving with you because it was so organic and it felt so right in that space. I can't imagine any other way of moving in that studio in Montgomery on that day. Like nothing else would have felt right.
One of the things that when we first started working on Migratus was after a trip to Germany, interestingly enough, and I won't tell that whole story. But when we got back to the United States, Tanya and I started asking the question, where do we belong? Where do Black bodies belong? We're using that academic language, Black bodies. Where do we belong? And so it was like, well, but we can't really get on the boat and go back to Africa until we go back to the shores, which means you got to work generationally to enslavement. So that took us to the plantation. But the thought was we cannot go to Africa and deal with that culture until we understand ourselves here. And we're American. We're African American, but we're American. And so it's important that we have a full understanding. And so then now it's like, well, I can entertain the language around the global South. But I couldn't entertain that language before because I wasn't ready to deal with the South. It's a process. So.
And it strikes me, Imani, as a process that is very much connected to intimacy. Like reading, I mean, I could read your book over 10 times and find ever new details because it's so intimate and it is, in the ways that Tanya was saying, so embodied as you make your way through. But I just wanted to hear you talk about intimacy in the context of this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, one, I'm thinking about the global South just really quickly because, we use this language because the person who coined the term was using it as the U.S. South as a metaphor for the organization of the world. And that's not incidental, right? Because it is a metaphor for the organization of the world. And that I do think there is it's so complicated, right? Because the South is this place where there is intimacy and violence are so close, right? This sort of intimate relation, right? The violence was up, right? So even talking about, right, what it meant to be in the cabin, to be born and to die enslaved and to live in between and to love in between is actually a kind of alchemy of resistance to the intimate right? It's also why, this sort of the romance that desegregation is going to put people in a better place, right? We know the South, you know, you can be real close to people who can do you a lot of damage, like they're your family, right? Across the color line, right? So that's not it, right? It's actually the ethics of relation between people. It's not the fact that you're up close to them. And I think that's sort of what I was trying to get at. Oh, sorry.
We just going on and on. I was looking for you, but I kind of wasn't looking for that. Sorry, Ashley.
No, I'm.
Should we open it up? I guess. Yeah, questions. We are the overtime, but would love to hear from you. Hello, hi. I can just. But we're only because we're recording. Want to hear your beautiful voice. Yeah.
Hi everyone, my name is Cynthia. I'm a screenwriter, and I'm a screenwriter who finds enjoyment in when I'm not sitting in a lonely space of observation. My activity that I do is I either perform as an actor, so I like to use my voice and use my body. And it wasn't until I moved to New Orleans and I had my own spiritual experience. I'm Haitian. So it was interesting being in New Orleans and having my own spiritual experience when I realized my body was speaking to me. And in releasing that, it made me able to write more freer. And so I wanted to know, when it comes to finding a ritual that creates permission for you to even go into uncharted territory or to revisit traumatic triggers, and to do it from a space of safety that you create for yourself, and also with tools that were given to you, what does that ritual to stability look like?
So I think that Tanya and I try to lead with best intentions, because we don't have a practice to prepare us for that work, and we don't have a practice that allows us to exit that work. That we have to just try to know that we have the best intentions, and sometimes it's going to work and sometimes it's just not. We believe in ancestors. We live with ancestors. We talk with ancestors who are here and who are not here. But we don't have a practice that helps us connect to them other than it's happening, I don't think.
I feel like because we have a practice of taking care of each other, we honor that the people that we work with need to be taken care of. And then those people who we're working with need to take care of the people that they're going into community to be in community with. So I feel like that care starts here, and that's the ritual that we create with each other to bring other people in the ritual of care, so that that difficult work when we go out into communities can happen, and we can regroup and we can talk about it. Because oftentimes you go into these communities and you have an idea of what you want to do, but it never works that way. Like there's always some pivot that you have to do, and letting people know that the pivot is okay, but we also can come back and take care of each other through conversation.
But there's also one last thing. There's that thing called, which is like a real dancing thing. There's that class. There's that daily practice that we do that's a physical thing, that allows us to have 20 minutes to talk to each other and get together. And then we go through this ritual called class every day.
And that's communal.
That's communal.
Yeah.
So we're led through that, and that hooks us into the physical. And then we go into the rehearsal, and then we're connecting with these stories. So there is a practice. So I want to slightly adjust what I was saying. There is a practice, but the practice is not, it's a physical trained practice that we are tapping into.
Thank you so much for the discussion tonight. Really appreciate it. Imani, and I love your work. I love it a great deal. You know, use it every semester. And You know, I'm not from the South, but I love Birmingham. My sister lived there for many years. And I actually I took a visiting appointment one semester, and it was the best teaching experience of my life as an academic. And I'm, in New Orleans all the time, right? But I'm also equally afraid of the South. I love it. I love being there and the energy, but then there's the contemporary politics that I'm so much afraid of, right? And how do we make sense of that? How can, I remember not R. Kelly, but another Kelly, has thought about the politics of the South. He said they're the most transgressive politics that are going on there right now, as far as activism and Black bodies and Black life. And I couldn't understand that and what that meant. And I just want to get your thoughts on that, because I love Black people, and I love the South because of the Black people.
Yeah, I mean, so I think thank you. I think it's a beautiful question, because part of what it means, I think, to be a Black person in the United States and maybe in the world requires some degree of a willing suspension of disbelief, right? Where we create spaces where we feel safe and those that we don't, so that we can navigate. So I have in some ways, the opposite experience. I almost have a different personality when I'm in the South. I'm less scared. I feel comfortable. I feel at home. Like I feel like I can trust people more easily. I know, and I don't think that that's because it's safer. I think it's because I've made decisions about how I negotiate in different spaces that allow, so there's an assessment that because we have to have places to breathe. But I also think that the politics, I think perhaps because of the history of the South is more brutal with respect to Black folks because of the history of the political economy of the South, right? Like it's where it happened, right? It's where the wealth of the nation was built, and so it's what so the same. I mean, there's some folks who don't consider Appalachia the South. I do. I mean, not all of Appalachia is the South, but even that powers the country. It's like people die in mines, right? Like there's these spaces where because of the political economy, there's just this incredible violence took place. So I think that part of it is that the people for whom that is so proximate, right, often have unbelievable intelligence about how to think about how do you negotiate politically, but also courage. Because I think that's part of the question. That's why you get such amazing organizing happening, right? Because you have to be really savvy to figure out. Like I wrote once about this. It's about a safe house in which Martin Luther King Jr. was kept, in between. So he would have died even earlier than he had been if he hadn't been able to be in this rural safe house, right? The idea of people having safe houses, right? That's not gone, right? There's these so I think it's that, but I also, this is the last thing I'll say, because we're really over time, is that I also think stories play a role in how we imagine spaces, right? So because I've written about, racial violence in the Midwest, which is unbelievably harrowing. So when if you're from Chicago, you know not to go to Cicero, right? Because that's dangerous. But if you don't know it, right, you don't know not to go. Or for me in Massachusetts as a kid, like my kid went to a couple summers ago, was going to Crane Beach in South Boston because he was there for summer school, and I was like, you can't go there. And he was like, what? It's like because somebody might bash your head in, right? So I think it's also the stories that we get shape our perception.
I mean, I do not want to cut this conversation off. I mean, it just seems such a shame to have all this brilliance here and only have 90 minutes. It really feels like a crime. But I want to offer each of you just last thoughts before we wrap.
I have 2 words. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Ditto, ditto, ditto. I love you. I love you. I love you. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. So I just want to thank you for coming and for being here, and thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And also thank you to Christian and Ashley and Shui and Aimee, who helped make this evening happen. And thank you to NYU, We Must, for making this space available to us and making this event possible. So, and thank you above all to you for coming and for us all being in some kind of community here together tonight. So please, thank you.